It's always a pleasure each year to talk to fellow film critics. And as always, I love talking to Sharon Hurst, who is a film critic and broadcaster. And Sharon, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Oh, thanks, Pete. Great to be with you again this year.
And it's good to talk to you because it looks like more and more films are being released. People are going back to cinemas. What's your observation of what's happening in the film world?
Yeah, it's been quite a dramatic rush at the end of this year. I mean, prior to that, I was thinking, oh, yeah, streaming's where it's at, that's taking over. And suddenly, as you know, we've been sort of inundated with information on new films and some big releases coming out. So, yeah, I think my take is what you just said, that cinema's undergoing a bit of a revival.
Which is great to see. Okay, now it's, as always, we talk about the best and perhaps worst films of the year.
Yes.
So, Sharon, let's talk about your lists.
Okay, my list. And you know, Pete, I'm an endless and compulsive list keeper. So I've really found it very hard to extract them this year. The one thing I should say to listeners, viewers, is that I tend to decline going to a lot of films that I discover, you know, perhaps have had really bad reviews, because I think I don't need to waste 2 hours of my life on this. So I end up with a lot of quite high scores, which I even bore myself. I think, oh no, another 4-star review. So this time I really dug deep to try and find the things that I had given 4.5 and above. And a few things stood out really heavily for me. And some of them are going to be perhaps very mainstream and some of them are going to be very obscure. So the big one that I seem to really remember going nuts over this year was Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. I just loved that to bits. Couldn't keep still in my seat. I loved his typically Baz take on the whole thing, a bit off-centre, everything a bit crazy. But what I really loved was the way that Austin Butler just inhabited Elvis. You know, he wasn't a dead spit lookalike, but to me, he just captured something about that era, about the man, made me feel the vulnerability of an artist, you know, sort of plagued by his own fame and his own demons. And this one was a big, big, big standout for me this year. So that was it. Now, I was going to go from features to documentaries, but while we're talking music films, the other one that really blew me away is a doco this year about David Bowie. That absolutely blew my mind, because I thought the way the director handled it, the creativity that he put into making the film just mirrored the creativity of David Bowie himself. And that again totally had me just sitting, this time not jumping in my seat, but sort of riveted in my seat, absorbing the beautiful visuals, just totally swept away by this moon age dreaming about David Bowie. So that was a big, big one for me this year as well. So those two were standing out loud and clear for me. Now, if I start looking through things that I gave 4.5 stars to, very early in the year, maybe I was a little bit over generous, but I know I absolutely loved the version of Cyrano that was, again, a bit musical, with Peter Dinklage, my favourite character from Game of Thrones, Tyrion Lannister. I've always loved Peter Dinklage from when I saw him in, what was that lovely thing? The Station Agent, yeah. So here he plays Cyrano, who loves the girl. Everyone knows the story of Cyrano. But I just found something so very moving about that film, and its production values were very beautiful. And early on in the year, I thought, yeah, this is going to be one of my top films. So many films later, 270 films later, I'm not sure I can remember a lot about it, except that I did give it a very high score. Now, going to a couple of very small films that got big scores from me, an Irish film called The Quiet Girl, which was done predominantly or half and half in English language and Gaelic language. Just a very, I guess we'd call it a small and intimate story of a young girl, a bit neglected by her birth family. Mum's awaiting birth of another baby. She's sent away to live with some distant relatives that she barely knows. But because they're embracing and loving, they just bring her out of her little shy shell. And I found it such a human story of what happens to people when they're given the love they need after they've been neglected. So this one really made a big impression upon me. And similarly, another two actually very small films, or I call them small films because they're not the things out there that the popcorn brigade are racing off to go and see. In fact, popcorn brigade will run a mile from these films. It was a film called Nowhere Special, an American movie. I don't even remember who the stars were. You'll probably remember, Pete. About a dad who knows he's dying. He's just your average knockabout dad. He's a tradie and he wants to find an adoptive family for his little boy, but he wants to interview them. He wants to know that it's the right family, that his beloved 3-year-old is going to. This was a rip your heart out sort of story about the love, just that unconditional love between a father and his family and the things he was looking for in the family that he wanted the child to go to.
Yes.
Loved it.
I think that was James Norton, and I think it was a British film.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was British.
British. I think it was British.
Yeah, okay. I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
You know, with me, in one neuron and out the other after I've written my reviews. But I remember just being so emotionally touched by this film. So, yeah, that and The Quiet Girl have got, I guess, a bit of resonance for each other about, you know, love of parents for children or lack of love thereof. Another one about families in a way is this French film, Petite Maman. So there was that Celine Sciamma that did it?
Yeah, Celine Sciamma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, so beautiful little film about a small girl, maybe she's 10, 11, whose grandma has died and she hasn't had a chance to say her farewells to her grandma. And she's helping her dad clear out the house. Whatever she's doing is almost irrelevant because she meets another little girl when she's playing out in the forest who looks dramatically like her. And I'm not going to say anything about who this other little girl may or may not be, but I guess it's looking at ideas of love and loss and grief and perhaps what grief does to you. And perhaps there's that element of time shifts. Maybe this other little girl could have been someone else in this child's life, but it had a mysterious, ethereal quality to it that I found, again, moving. I mean, you know me, Pete, I tend to be very much driven by whether I emotionally react to a film. I can admire a film technically, but if it doesn't move me, I'll go, duh, yeah, not interested. But even if it may not be the world's best technically, but it grabs me emotionally, then I really go for it. And Petite Maman had that effect on me. Something that's so different from the ones I've talked about, and I didn't expect to really like this one, but I think the audacity of this just got me. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. It's a sort of a multiverse sci-fi spectacular of lunacy, starring Michelle Yeoh and Jamie Lee Curtis. It just starts as a story of a woman and her husband who run a laundromat, and she has to go to the tax office to pay her taxes, where Jamie Lee Curtis is this very forbidding sort of tax officer. And this this woman suddenly finds herself being transported to some sort of weird alternate universe, and it takes off from there. It's sort of beyond description. One of those films you just have to see, and I think you have to surrender to it and go along for the ride. Not everybody's going to like this sort of zaniness and lunacy, but I just thought, yeah, it's such imaginative filmmaking that one really left a mark on me at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. Similarly, another bit of lunacy, because I happen to have quite a love for this lunatic actor, is Nicolas Cage. So I really enjoyed The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, in which he sort of plays himself. He's a bit midlife crisis, down on his luck, paid $1 million to be the guest at a party where life starts imitating art, and events happen at this party where he has to actually be the sort of action hero that he is in all his movies. So again, it was another bit of lunacy. And I think for me, both of those films were a lovely light relief from what I perceive as very heavy films that I tend to watch. I am a viewer of heavy films. Then, to throw my list into disarray, came 2 films at the very end of the year that suddenly I had to adjust my list. And one of them is The Banshees of Inisherin, by the people that made In Bruges, with Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson. And it's just this story that on one level is really simple and not a lot happens. And on the other level, I guess it's a metaphor for very serious things that do go on in life, as in why wars happen. These two blokes are best friends, Podrick and Colm, and one day Colm just says to Podrick, "Oh, you're not my best friend anymore. I don't want to see you. Go away. I don't want to hear about you." So he sort of thinks, oh, what's happened to my friendship? And he won't take he won't take being told the friendship's over, and pretty bad things start happening, threats that Colm makes. But underneath it, it makes you really go away and ponder, yeah, this is why wars happen, because people either don't communicate, they don't hear each other when they're saying something to each other, and everything escalates from there. But I found that a delight, and it's up for 50 squillion awards, starting with the Golden Globes. And then I, as did you, Pete, took ourselves off to see Avatar: The Way of Water. In fact, I only saw it yesterday, and I think it's just a technical tour de force of world creation of other worlds. And while it may be a tad overly long, I really thought, wow, this is just great use of cinema. I don't need to go into the story, it's way too complicated, but it's again something to just wallow in and immerse in, this visual on the screen. So that one made the list. Then you always like to ask me, what about things from festivals? So we're generally talking about foreign language films here, not always, because one of the ones from a festival that it was from the Spanish Film Festival, but much of it was in English. I love this film called Language Lessons, about a dude who gets given by his boyfriend the gift of Spanish language lessons for a year. But meanwhile, the boyfriend ups and dies. So he's left with not only his grief, but this year's commitment to learn the Spanish language online with a lovely girl called Carina. And I guess that's a story, again, about coping with your grief, but a friendship that develops between the teacher, Carina, and the young man, Adam, and just how they open themselves to each other online via these Spanish lessons. So Language Lessons was a winner for me. As an overall festival, I think JIFF, the Jewish International Film Festival, every year is a stand-up, knock them down, blow you away festival, where Eddie Tamir has a real knack of curating wonderful films and finding new stories, ever new stories in a story that we go, oh yeah, how can they chuff out yet another Holocaust story? But it's incredible what he does and what he finds and what he comes up with. So that's just a blanket statement that if you're going to go to one festival next year, you don't got to be Jewish to see them. Just pick out some stuff from JIFF, because they are universal stories. They're not just Jewish stories. So I love that. Now, I guess we should look at a couple more documentaries, because one of them quite early on in the year, a film that I don't even know if it got much of a general release, was called, got to get its title right, Street Gang, How We Got Here. It told the story of how Sesame Street developed as an educational tool for children. But it had such a heart to it, because not only was it about the theories that went behind making this story for children, making this series for children, but it was also about the absolute 110% commitment of everybody that was involved in Sesame Street, getting it together, and the way that the script developers of that series managed to convey really difficult issues like death through to children. And I thought it was such a superbly constructed doco, and it felt very important, you know, as a documentation of an educational tool. So I love that to bits. Something on Netflix. I chose a Netflix film as one of my best, and it was called David Attenborough, A Life on This Planet. I've always been a huge fan of Attenborough, and this 1.5 hour film that he made, doco, about his life, to me was really important. Did you happen to see this, Pete?
No.
No. I recommend it to you. It was sort of his testament, you feel, because he's getting so old, he's feeling maybe he's going to fall off his perch. But not only does he have all those wonderful animals and scenes and places around the world, but this time he finally stands up and says, look, folks, it's not all happy news. It's in fact total disaster. And all these beautiful animals are not going to be around for the next generation to see if you don't get off your bottoms and do something about it. So it was a testament to his life, to everything he's done that's wonderful, as well as just the work that he has done and the importance of planet Earth and the threat to planet Earth. So it's still on Netflix, and I tell anyone to give that one a Guernsey if you haven't seen it. Aussie films. We shouldn't leave Aussie films out of the mix. I don't think it's been a huge year for Aussie films, but a few of them have quite struck me. One of them, the one that our Film Critics Association gave the big prize to, was Molly Johnson, The Drover's Wife, directed by and starring Leah Purcell, a very loose interpretation of Henry Lawson's poem about a woman in the outback just fending for herself and also discovering a lot about her Indigenous heritage. I thought it was a very interesting rendering of that story, beautifully executed. So this was a winner for me, and it has scooped a lot of awards. Another two docos that struck me in the Aussie department. One was called Firefront, which was cobbled together out of footage from a lot of people's mobile phones and firefighters' mobile phones, people who were there on the front line. And in as much as a film can put you in the seat of something ghastly that's happening, which of course it never can, but in as far as it can, this was just a terrifyingly visceral film of what it must have been like for anyone who was caught up in those terrible fires of 2019, 2020. And I thought, as an editing job, it was just remarkable the way they put it together. And of course, they managed to bring in why it's so important that we again get off our bottoms and do something about let's not call it global warming, climate change, how important it is. So that struck me too. Pete, how much longer have we got? I have to ask you because
Keep going, we've still got time.
Okay, no worries.
Yep.
Another doco for film buffs, and I bet you love this, Splice Here, A Projected Odyssey, the story of how real film got overrun by digital projection. And it's directed, was his name Rob Murphy, the guy that did it? Yeah, someone who had been a projectionist for many years.
Yeah.
And he takes you through the whole thing of what real actual film stock means and why it makes such beautiful film on screen and what happened when digital came along. And I think it's not only a film buffs film, but film buffs should never miss this film. And for me, it was very educational because I have to say I am a bit of an ignoramus, less now that I've seen that film, as to what projected film means and all the different widths of it and so on. And it was such a beautiful nostalgia trip of films that have come and gone that have been so special on the big screen, and why they will always have a place in our hearts, and particularly how Melbourne has the Sun and the Astor and the Rivoli and places that still manage to put on these wonderful films in their original form using film stock. So that was a winner. Yeah, so I think that probably, there are a few others. I can just say names like Limbo, about a bunch of refugees waiting on a Scottish island for their refugee status. I thought that was wonderful. I thought Quo Vadis Aida was wonderful, about a woman working for the UN during the dreadful Bosnian-Serbian war. I thought that was an absolute winner. I thought Full Time, a French film with, I forget the woman's name, whoever she was that acted in it, about
Laura Navalny.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Laura Navalny.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes. Just again, a film that technically was amazing. Someone juggling a fast-paced life between motherhood and work, and it really reflected the modern world in a way that made your heart bled for her. But technically, it was such a film that drew you into how fast the whole thing was. And going back to Aussie ones, a couple with Aussie resonance, a cute doco called Chef Antonio's Recipe for Revolution, about a bloke in Italy who runs the little albergo, a sort of hotel come restaurant, where he's training all these young people with Down syndrome to be able to wait tables, chef in the kitchen, do whatever they work in the hotel, do whatever they could within their abilities. And the amazing thing was that in the Blue Mountains in Australia, there is a hotel under the same umbrella that does just that. And I thought, that could be interesting to visit. Another Aussie film that I loved was Moja Vesna, this tiny Slovenian Aussie co-production about a little girl dealing with the grief of her mother and trying to just keep her small family together, an older pregnant sister, a father who's not coping, and just how an amazing performance by a child actor. It was this one, I thought, tiny film, probably will barely see the light of day, but I thought it was really, really strong. So Pete, that probably covers in a very big blah, all the films that have stuck in my head, or many of them. I mean, there's so many honourable mentions that are brilliant, but,
Yeah.
Like Belfast and 13 Lives and Eyes of Tammy Faye and Good Luck Leo Grande, they're just wonderful films, but how many can one have on one's list? Lots.
Of course. Are there any films, I know you don't see the ones that you think you're not going to like or whatever, but are there any films that you did see during the year that disappointed you because they didn't quite work?
Yes, Pete. I was disappointed in Mothering Sunday. I normally adore Colin Firth, and I don't know why. It just sort of left me thinking, it was okay, and I just, other people had spoken quite highly of it, and maybe I missed something about it. I don't know. Now, another one, but I think this was my inability to understand it, was Neptune Frost, which was a visual tour de force from the Melbourne Film Festival. Amazing film, I think, set in Burundi or somewhere you just don't see films from. And it was musical and it was visually stunning, but I ended up going, what was that about? And I thought, no, I haven't probably got my brain in gear for this one. So, yeah, I was a bit disappointed, and it had won a big award at MIF. So that was a disappointment. And good old Mel Gibson turned up yet again in a film called On the Line, about a sort of radio shock jock who gets the phone call that his wife and kid are taken captive, and had a reasonable twist at the end, but I guess it was a bit of a schlock shock jock of a film. It was a bit odd for me, but they were the only ones really that stuck in my mind as getting my lowest scores, so it was a great year for film for me overall. I really did love it.
I agree with you. Yes, it was a very good year. And it looks like over the next month or so, we're going to be treated to a number of other very good films.
That's right. We've got our invite for Babylon, haven't we, already?
Yes.
It looks fantastic, and some other
yeah.
fantastic stuff will be coming up. And those Boxing Day releases should be pretty good. People need to get along to them.
Yes. You haven't seen Triangle of Sadness yet?
I actually have. Now that's pretty bizarre. This is out there. I'm still thinking about it, actually. I haven't quite constructed my scrambled thoughts about it. It's very interesting. Is that in one of your tops for the year?
It's my number 2 film of the year.
Yay! Well, it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Yeah,
Yes.
It's really creative. So I
It
just
is.
haven't sort of ordered in my head exactly what I think's going on with it, but it was amazing. I mean, it held me captive for the whole time.
Yes. And there's a documentary beginning on Thursday, which is the Canadian entry for the Oscars, international Oscars, called Eternal Spring, about the Falun Gong and the storming of the radio station in 2002 to promote their positive images and so on.
Okay.
And the animation and the creative way the filmmakers dealt with it is just superb.
Good. Okay, then I shall look forward to that, and see if I can get hold of it. Yes.
Yes, I know, because some films are available sometimes for screening purposes.
Yes, when we ask for screeners, sometimes we're lucky and we get them, and other times they say, sorry, no screeners.
That's right. Well, that's a great list, Sharon, as always, and have a nice holiday season.
Thank you, Pete, and you too.
Thank you, and I'll be seeing you at the movies very soon, I'm sure.
Totally will. Yeah, see you at the movies. Bye.
Sharon Hurst, thank you so much for talking with me.
Welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.